clay in my veins, was born with clay in my veins. Thanks, y'all. You can take a seat. I was born with clay in my veins. No blood, no need for blood. I was born with clay in my veins. From the manufactory of South Carolina, the American dynasty grows, all because of me, clay in my veins, clay in my veins, clay in my veins, yo, clay in my veins, clay. When you whip me for my remission of sins, don't expect covenant, expect rebellion, clay in my veins, yo, clay in my veins, clay in my veins, clay in my veins, clay. I was born with clay in my veins, 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 was born with clay in my veins. Thanks, y'all. You can take a seat. That I spent all this time trying to figure out, how do I reconcile the things that I love? How do I reconcile the things that I love? That when you think about the hours necessary to be good at anything, and then the hours necessary in order to kind of survive, like, how do you put those things together in a way? And then some of us have this added weight, this added burden, this need to try to figure out ways to not only think about our own lives, but maybe the things that also happen outside of our studio. Right? Now, how do you do that? How do you be a full-time potter? Right? Which means that you gotta pay your rent, you gotta pay your studio space in Chicago, you gotta pay for kiln time, right? You got to find the time outside of other things to load kilns and fire kilns. Right? Imagine this. It's about 1995, and it's my first NCECA. Where's Ingrid? And Ingrid Lilligren, Ingrid, stand up. Ingrid Lilligren was my teacher at Iowa State. She was like, oh, we should go to Minnesota, go to NCCA. I was like, yeah, that's cool. And I got there, and there were these dudes, and they had like these 14-day wood-fired pots. And everybody was walking around with their like Naborigama style, Japanesey, oh-so breezy pots. And if you stop long enough to say, yo, man, I really dig your pot, they'd be like, oh, thanks. Yes. It's actually 21 days. I remember being in Minneapolis and then going around Minnesota to all the varying potters and seeing Warren and just like, doing that clay thing, like, it was like, I kind of felt like I had met my people, kind of. Except that the pots that I made were a little bit different from everybody else's pots. The subjectivity was a little bit different. The things that I wanted to think about, the things that haunted me and made me celebrate, they were all just a little bit different. And as I looked out in 95 at the sea of people, I didn't see myself reflected. There were 5 black people there. 2 of them were on staff at a hotel. There was me, there was somebody, I think she was black. She was cute. I think she was black. I'm gonna say she was black so that I can say that there were 5 of us because I like odd numbers. And I think that it was in Minnesota that I decided that something was wrong with this, that there was this kind of disconnect between the beautiful cultural legacies of peoples in this country and then how the craft had been esteemed only among some groups. Now, this isn't a white bashing party, because there's a lot of y'all here. So we're gonna try to find another way to work this out. But as I go through these slides, and I'm gonna kind of use them to help me tell a story, I want you guys to think with me as a group of people who really believe that our hands can transmit things out of the human spirit and manifest greater things, that the work that we do as skilled makers is the best work in the world because it connects us to God, because it's an act of creation. That with us, how do we expand the field, not only in terms of the ideologies that govern how we make and the things that we make, but how do we make the field more inclusive? So I'm gonna roll through these projects, right? And as I roll through them, there are a couple things on my mind. One is I wanna make an interesting and compelling thing that I feel compelled to make. But the other part of it is that I feel compelled to try to create, demonstrate, model ways of imagining what the practice could look like, so that part of the work is about the thing, and then the other part of the work is about the thing that makes other things happen. This glass lantern slide collection is about 60,000 images. And we've been combing them, looking for images of the other, anybody other than a Western canon of anything. And there was a lot of Japanese silk screens. There's a lot of Polynesian hand arts. There's some craft. That this collection of glass lantern slides has become a kind of refuge, a kind of repository of interesting anomalies. And that if you comb long enough culture, you find these anomalies pop up, And I feel like I'm always trying to figure out, like, what do I do? What do I do with these anomalies, and how do I link these anomalies to the world that I live in, to the things that I believe in, right? So I decided that I would kind of look at the glass lantern slides and kind of comb through and find my history of ceramics as I was thinking about one dude, a dude named Dave, a potter named Dave. I remember being in Ingrid's class and trying to figure out, how do I connect Paul Soldner's legacy and this beautiful stuff that Pete Voulkos did? How do I enter that work of these big dudes, you know? How do I enter the work of Ruth Duckworth? Like, where's my entry point, you know? Could my entry point be Hans Koper? Is that a reasonable entry point? And could I master those things and feel like I'm really being myself? And so I turned my gospel music on and try to make a good pot. I turned my hip hop on, right? And there were these things that just, they didn't match up. They didn't match up at Iowa State. They didn't match up at Lil Street. I was just a complicated anomaly. And I didn't always feel good about that, right? But it was like, I finally found a dude named Dave. 1840s, 1850s, it was like finally a brother mentioned as part of the canon. I gotta do something with this. And I found myself trying to figure out ways to make Dave's symbolic life, a life not fully known, but one that I could kind of like riff on, because while I'm not a slave, I know struggle a little bit. And I found myself trying to embed, I wanted to be in his body. I wanted to think about Dave and those struggles, and I wanted to kind of find ways to move Dave forward a little bit. That finally I had a kind of historical link that I could root in, a link complementary to Barnard and Shoji. And it was Chipstone in the Milwaukee Art Museum and Joyce Foundation. Some folk got together, said, look, you know, we got some of these pots on Dave. Can you help us think about what to do with it? Right. And they were like, maybe, you know, this is John, maybe you could, like, you know, recreate a Dave pot or something like that. And this is where the expansion part started for me. That I wasn't interested in making a pot at all. That I wanted to figure out a way to make Dave as a platform, a new platform by which other people might imagine themselves being involved in this amazing world of clay. That Dave, for me, became a kind of new counterpoint in American ceramics. And for 3 years, I dedicated my life to kind of elevating that platform as much as I could artistically, so that there was one more model to look at, y'all. And so we tricked out the Milwaukee Art Museum, right? And there were some other things that were at stake. Milwaukee Art Museum, I walked through, it was largely white, just like in Sika. So I was like, how do you thoughtfully create opportunities where other people who live down the street from the museum might actually feel like they have an entrance point? What I found was that it's really simple. You just got to invite people, right? And Sika invited all y'all. It shows up on your bulletin boards of your basements at your grad schools, and you come out. You know, the TED conference, they're diverse. The reason they're diverse is because they find black and brown and yellow and white people, and they say, would y'all come together and think about big ideas with us? That there's a kind of intentionality in the leadership, right? And so I spoke with the leadership at Milwaukee Art Museum. It's like, look, how can we crack this? Right? Like, I spoke to leadership in Chicago asking, like, how do we create these moments? It's like, all right, I'm not just interested in black folk. I'm interested, what would happen if I created a Japanese alias? Well, I knew I'd get all the white people if I created a Japanese alias. But could this be a calling card for other people who were also feeling kind of underseen, right? That all of us are excited about the histories of Korea, China, and Japan. How do we bring that contemporary representation forward? Can we invite our friends? Can we go to those places and not just glean how to make a better foot for our pots, but imagine those as new friendships that become part of our lives? So I started thinking about activating space, but also activating people. I decided that I would create a gospel choir to kind of celebrate Dave and make a body of music, because it was like, well, if my homies don't want to go to the museum, maybe there's another way that I could talk about the power of pots and not need the museum. Brother Steve, can you help me with this video? No laughing yet.
Sail my way.
Will you join me out with a counterpoint of some sort?
Those teapots sail my way.
Y'all murmur real low, please.
Those teapots sail my way.
Guide my hands, 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 guide my hands.
Great eternal potter,
guide my hands.
there are still too few of us.
Guide my hands.
How can we take the flame and the wheel
guide my hands
and turn out little black and brown baby potters?
guide my hands.
Eternal potter of the universe,
guide my hands.
make me a union, make me a club, make me an organization
Guide
of
my hands.
makers.
Guide my hands.
By next year, great potter, may our numbers triple. And in those numbers, may our colors broaden. Let the unions of the world receive us. Guide our hands.
Guide my hands.
Guide our intentions. Guide our leadership.
Guide my
Guide me.
hands. Guide my hands.
All over the world.
Guide my hands.
Thank you, Yaw. That there were moments when I thought, what's most at stake is my capacity to make. And I'd be in my studio, focused in my studio, diligently trying to make the best spout ever. And one day in graduate school, Ingrid looked at me and she said, look, Theaster, you're an okay potter. But maybe there are some things that you're supposed to do beyond clay. And it was like, at that moment, I thought, no, I'm gonna nail this handle, baby. I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna get this handle. Oh, I'm gonna get this handle. But I'm so glad that Ingrid gave me permission as a maker to imagine that there were these other things that I knew were at stake and that there was room for them all. I went to Kohler as I was preparing for this show at the Milwaukee Art Museum. And these men, I'm gonna say these brothers, they weren't brothers, I mean, they were kind of brothers. These brothers at Kohler were starting to be very concerned for their jobs, that the generations of opportunities that had been there for these Germans that were brought, right, to create this little German enclave, to make this amazing manufacturing industry, that they, like other people in other parts of urban spheres, were starting to lose their jobs, that the moment that affected some of us in the 60s and the 70s and then NAFTA, that they were starting to experience that they could no longer afford to live in Kohler. They had to be in Sheboygan. They had to be in on the edge of Sheboygan. Sheboygan is like the poor place next to the exclusive place. And that there you were again, like the opportunity for hand fading because industry and technology, because commercial, because of capitalism, moving jobs. And even when we were trained in the hand, that men were afraid that their sons and daughters would not have the same skill or even the opportunity not only to make $1, but to have an opportunity to make a thing because these jobs were going away. So what do you do with all this equipment at this place, all of this facility available? What do you do as a company when on paper you really don't make the bottom line that you want to make? What do you do when the invitation to invite other kinds of people into a conference like this costs more than we have? That I think tonight, if I said that there are 4,000 people in this room and that there should be 4,000 more and they should be a more complementary color, that we could find the money to make sure that they got here. That I think that there are people in the room that would like to see the field expand. And that when we open our journals, we would be surprised to see other forms of making, other modes of thinking, other cultures that are exploring things in the material that we never could believe. That we have to find ways to expand the field. I went to Kohler, y'all, and I was changed. It was amazing. Not only because I had never seen that level of manufacturing before, but because these men were innovating in real time, because they were making toilets all day. They were lifting thousands of pounds with like very simple pneumatic presses, and innovating. That a master mold maker would make something and the dude on the floor would be like, the mold doesn't work. It sticks in this corner. It's like, what you gonna do, John? What you gonna do if the mold sticks in the corner, right? It's it's so super old school, this kind of piecework, this handwork, and it's being lost, and the only way that you'll be able to experience it is through a living history museum, right? That Kohler will have to make a museum of itself, right? And I'm saying, but wait a minute, there's about 350,000 square feet that are available where the residency program could expand, you know. And so I'm just talking about thinking expansively. They brought me there. I'm so glad that the residency exists. I want it to be bigger. I hope somebody will pull me aside tonight and say, hey, I want to help the John Michael Kohler Artist Residency Program expand. Y'all holler at them and make that. Endow 5 positions for artists of color to be at the Cola residency every year. If we want to expand the field, y'all, I'm just hollering. So I got there, and there were some things, it's like, all right, I'm messing around with some kind of recycled. I'm thinking about, I like recycling things, and they were chucking all of these beautiful molds. They were chucking the molds and chucking they call it cull. It's like the stuff that, for whatever reason doesn't work anymore. And I thought, oh, I want the leftovers. Like, oh, yeah, I could I could just rip these leftovers, And so I was taking sinks and ripping them apart, doing that color thing, And then one day I came to work, and I found that one of the shifts started at 4:30, and if I came at 4:30, I would get the nod. They were because they were used to weirdo artists. But if I came when the shift started, they'd be like, oh, this brother might actually be serious. And we developed some camaraderie around time, right? And I come in, and then one day this dude, he came up to me and he was like, Theaster, sometimes I feel like a nigga too. And it was this moment where all of my conversations about Dave the Potter, it hit these brothers, And it was we work hard all day, we innovate, we work for a family. And it was this great moment when I thought, man, this material is still binding people together. It's it is helping me imagine that I have a real relationship with the East. God bless Tokonami Japan, God bless IWCAT, right? If we want to do some work, and we've been talking about passing, IWCAT can't afford to bring foreigners anymore. The Chamber of Commerce in Tokonami shut it down. We should be supporting IWCAT because they've been supporting non-Eastern artists for the last 25 years. We should be sending money to Ichihara-san. They taught me some things. They taught me that I'd never be good enough, right? They taught me that excellence is something that you live for, try to achieve, and it's always just outside of your grasp. And if you talk about excellence too much, you're probably talking too much. Some real relationships came out of that. Real and unexpected relationships that I was willing to nurture and cultivate. Koichi Ohara, dope potter, crazy physicist, kiln builder extraordinaire. Because sometimes the mashups look a little weird, y'all. Right? But it can't be just me and Koichi in my studio. I mean, you gotta bring the crew. If Koichi's in Chicago, I can't just hide him under a bushel. I gotta let that Asian light shine, baby. Ohio. We were also sharing a studio with Marva Jolly. I wish she was up on your screen. She also passed this past year. When I finished and I moved back to Chicago, Marva Jolly let me use her studio at Chicago State University. Used it for a little while, and then a few years later, I had my own pottery studio. I said, Marva, won't you come? She had retired. Marva, won't you come make some pots with me? Marva made pots in preparation for an exhibition. Took the pots home, laid down, and passed. It's but if you're gonna go out, that's Potter style, right? I mean, I'm imagining that she had one last, you know what I'm saying. But something started to grow in me. I started thinking that clay was a part of my practice, but the other part was about how do I make this big and complicated equation? How do I invite more people into my practice? How do I suggest that in places like Philly, Detroit, Ohio, in the Rust Belt, on the East Coast, places where there's amazing facility, like Steve was telling me, he just got a beautiful building in Texas. How do we take the availability of opportunity and turn it into opportunity not just for ourselves, but for others? So I started this project called Soul Manufacturing Corporation. And what I did was, every time a museum would ask me to do a show, this was after Dave, I would invite 3 potters to go to a city, find some potters in that city, and train up some young folk. And I would basically use the museum's money to kind of create a new little economy temporarily. Folk would make pots, and they started making a lot of pots. And I was like, what am I going to do with all these pots? Right? But since the museums were like paying, and Dan, I'm not cheap. I was like, well, what else could these potters need in the museum that might be complementary to what real potters need? So I was like, well, can we hire a yogi? Right? Can we hire somebody and, Ingrid be doing all these like weird moves, she can foxtrot and stuff. I was like, can we hire somebody to like make sure potters' backs are aligned? Can we get a DJ that might come in and spin some Stevie Wonder, Think about the inner visions, and how the inner visions are related to porcelain production. Could we have somebody come in and read poetry? Read. And that work felt like it was part and parcel of the practice. And this was no longer just thinking about, it wasn't about thinking about the craft, or thinking about, the craft. It was not thinking about the craft. It was thinking about what is the place of craft in the world? How do we elevate the experience of clay so that people want it at every level? I was really kind of preoccupied with this. That the art craft stuff doesn't mean anything to me. It's like, how do we take our skill and these things that we feel compelled to do and make them the most interesting things possible? Right? And so I found myself like starting to move with clay alongside the other things, in my practice that I was interested in wood. Like I'm looking at my boy Kevin, cats who helped me make things, looking at my guy Eric, looking at Mijay, my architect. Like there's this crew of us, and we're thinking like, how do we demonstrate another kind of practice that elevates the field and then like elevates human beings, right? And I found that clay, it was giving me an opportunity to like dig into all these other materials and come to these materials with like new imagination. That clay does things that other materials can't do. And so I was like, well, what can I do with concrete? How can I and what are the limitations of clay, and how do I consider those limitations and do more in the world? It's like cool. I'm gonna expand the field. Concrete. I'll just put a slip on the concrete. That's a pot, right? That it was no longer just about, God, I feel crazy saying this. It was no longer just about clay. It was about how do we think of ourselves as the most creative people in the world and do more in the world. And when clay fits, wear it. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I want to be the best potter ever. On Thursdays and Fridays, I may have to do a little bit of administration. And sometimes I like playing with my dad's tar kettle, making some roofing works, playing with fire hoses, imagining the peoples of the world and their rickshaws. I've been making bricks lately. I've been thinking not only about studio practices, but also about manufacturing practices. The possibility of a scale that is no longer 1-to-1, but it's 1-to-100, 1-to-1,000, even 1-to-10,000. Like, how much can we dream and still go to potter's heaven? When do we cross the line? What are the processes that we go through to make more interesting kinds of work? Or is this the only place? And for some of us, the essential tea bowl is where we want to be. And that's really important to me. hold it down, right? That the studio practice is an important practice, period. And there are some of us in this room who feel torn between the things they do in their studios and the things they do outside their studios. The limitations of representation inside of the material and ways that they can expand the field. And for you people, I'm saying, go all the way. Imagine that there are no limits. Tonight, Potters, we have permission to do whatever we want. Now, we all understand that the Dutch kilns are very expensive and that we want to be careful about, the soft brick. We want to be careful that if anything means damaging the kilns, that there will be, additional fees that will be incurred, and that we want to be careful. I know that everybody's charged up about what the Theaster spoke about last night, but it doesn't mean that business is different from the business the way it's been. No glass in the kilns, please. That's tomorrow's conference. Yeah. That I wanted more people to see my pots. So I started having dinners. That I didn't want to haggle with somebody over $25. Like, you make that 16, 18-day wood-fired pot, right? You buried it. You've buried it. It's like right in front of the flue. It's like right, like in the stoking chamber. It's like it is the pot. It is like the one, and it is black. It is carbonized. It is sooted. It's so black. It's purple. It's the color of this brother's skin. It is beautiful. It is beautiful. Purple. And somebody walks up to you and they say, all I have is $19. I really love this pot. And, I live in Wyoming, and God, I'm going to enjoy, and it's like, can I have it for $19? Can I buy the 2 purple pots? They want the 2 purple pots. Lord, they want my 2 purple 18-day pots. And I'm a somewhat spiritual brother, so I'm like, all right, if they ask for your shirt, give them your cloak. And I'm like, no, I don't want to give them my cloak. I don't want to give up my purple pots. I finally found my identity. It takes 18 days to get me there, and sweat and tears, and you gonna take my only black pot? They don't want the porcelain ones. They don't want the cute ones with the orange little blush of the flame. They don't want that one. They want the essentialized carbonized, well stoked. And I just didn't want to give I didn't want to give the gift away like that. I didn't want to haggle. I didn't want to feel like a part of me was like the negotiation wasn't fair. So I was like, I got to find some other ways. I got to find some other ways to do this, So I was like, well, if I can get somebody to underwrite a dinner at $10,000, and Lil Street is $750 a month plus $1,000 per kiln load. They're very expensive. Gas is expensive in Chicago. $10,000 would allow me to make 650 ceramic objects. And if I had 25 people and 3 servings, that I was really grappling not only with the material moment, but kind of the ecology of the moment. Now I'm talking to us as a field, like the kind of, how do you make this work? How do you, and of course we have to teach, and of course we have to bartend, and of course some of us have to get married to make it work. Don't look around. Don't look at nobody, and just hold your husband or your wife's hand and just act like this doesn't apply to you. But what I found was that once I was kind of in the dinners, that the dinners allow for these other things. And y'all know this. I'm talking to people who believe in eating because they like showing off their pots. The dinners became a touchstone where people from different parts of the city and then throughout the country, from around the world, could meet each other. My neighbors on the block could do stuff. I live on this block. It's just a normal block. But we started doing things, doing them at a very high level. Y'all hear Yaw would come to dinner. He'd sing grace. People wouldn't know what to do, right? And I found that the cultural piece that I couldn't figure out in undergrad, that the things were starting to merge, that they were becoming more harmonic and harmonious, that they were integrated in a way that voice felt like an extension of my hand, that I couldn't, that it was like right there. And they were just the things that I knew how to do. I only know how to do 3 things. I can breathe a little bit. That's the only one I can really mention in public. But I can breathe a little bit, and I just thought, well, why don't I concentrate on these virtues? And that if I commit to urban planning and religious studies and making and sculpting, that maybe those things over 20 years, they might make more sense than they did when they were isolated, when they were the silos of my life. And I thought I go to work and I'm an urban planner. I get off work, I go to be a hobby potter, and then on Sundays I go to church. That it was like, what if I understood the sacredness of the city and that manifested itself through the things that I make? What if I was trying to re-sacralize? Dinner allowed that. Dinner allowed me to think about the young people on my block and invite them into the conversations the way Ingrid would invite me to her house in Ames, Iowa. That there was a kind of ambition growing, and it was a humble ambition. It was like, this old little house can do much more than just be a house. These buildings that I'm affiliated with through the University of Chicago, they can do more for more people if we're intentional. Right? And so it goes from like the building that's been 20 years fallow to a building that is kind of radiating out, asking like, what do artists need? How can artists use gallery space and residency space? What kind of flex space is necessary? So I'm like my boy Kelly and Kyle at Xavier, and kind of thinking about like, what can we do in the world? How can we push the institutions that we're a part of to create more opportunity? And then the synergy started to really happen, that it was like, all right, I do believe in the city. I do love this material. Bricks. And it was like, and it took me 20 years to get to bricks. It took me 20 years. How many people have gotten to bricks? How many people? Do we have any brick lovers in the house? Good, because I need some help, because we trying to figure out how to, right? And then I asked the mayor of my city, Mayor, if I had a brick company and I could make some bricks, and you had a building that needed bricks, could you buy your bricks from me? I asked my friend David Ajay, hey, if you were designing a building, a great architecture, and you had a very kind of complicated brick that you need made, and I could make that complicated brick, and I became the only one that could make that complicated brick, I became your preferred vendor, would you let me make your bricks? And I started trying to imagine an expansive practice where I could think about the friendships that I have in the world and ask them hard questions about like, oh, so you can never meet your minority business requirements? Like you can never find enough union labor to do that thing? What if soul manufacturing wasn't just a museum project, but it became a soul manufacturing corporation? What if we had the capacity, Matt, my homie, what if Matt went from making, 20 bricks a day to 20,000 bricks a day? And then, like Kohler, what could I do for the field if I was a brick mogul? So every day I feel like I'm vacillating between these things of like, Should I make the thing, or should I make the thing that makes the thing? Should I make the thing? Should I make the thing that makes the thing? Thank you. Thank you.